Welcome back to Reading with Mo and another bookshelf spotlight tour. Today we are going to be looking at the last shelf on the main bookcases that I have, and it's the top right hand side that you can't even see now. I'll insert cutaway so you can get an idea, a little preview of some of the books that are currently living on that shelf. The upper shelf of my bookcases contain all the books that have like white to like tan colored spines. I'll go ahead and show you guys which ones I have read, which ones I haven't read, and at the end I'll go ahead and choose a few that I want to include or want to try and get to for my TBR for the month of May. If you have seen my May TBR, which should already be up before this, then you'll already have an idea of what those books are, but in case you haven't, then you'll get to find them out now. So let's get into them. I've already done the work of taking them all down from that top shelf, which, you know, is a little bit reckless because I have to stand on my bed to reach them and pull them down, but we have them all down here, and I'll go ahead and show you guys all the books. I'm not going to be doing these in any particular order, just as I grab them from the bed that I have them set on right now. The first I have not read is Valerie by Sarah Stridsberg. This book has been on my shelves way too long. I don't even remember what this book is about. I think I bought this like years ago from probably a book outlet or something like that. In this book we follow a nameless narrator who is revisiting the room where Solanus died, the courtroom where she was tried and convicted of attempting to murder Andy Warhol. So yes, this is what I need to get to and see if I'm still even interested in continuing to read this. I love the cover on it. It's very beautiful, but yes, it's been sitting on my shelves for so long. Then we have a book I have read, and that is Witchwood by Tara Muffy. This is, I don't even remember now if it's middle grade or young adult, but this is the like follow-up or companion novel to Furthermore, which is a like fantasy series, definitely marketed toward a younger age range. I did enjoy reading this at the time. I do want to reread it though, because I think I didn't enjoy it as much as Furthermore. I can't really say what's happening because obviously this is like a sequel to the first book. I don't remember now if we're following the same main character or if we follow like someone different from the main book, or if it just like takes place in the same world. It's been so long since I have read this one, so it's definitely due for a reread. Then we have one I have not read yet, and that is All That She Carried, The Journey of Ashley Sack, A Black Family's Keepsake by Taya Miles. This is a nonfiction book. I have attempted to read it before. I just am easily distracted and never continued with it. I don't think I really made it too far into it, but it's kind of a more recent release. It's about this family's history, looking like through 3 generations, kind of having this physical item, a sack that the family had, and kind of how it ties these like different generations together. Next we have a very popular book, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I love Donna Tartt as an author, all of her books. I have not reread The Secret History though since I first read it all those years ago. I'm definitely interested in rereading it eventually and seeing if it holds up to my first reading. Over the past few years, this book has definitely blown up on BookTube, and so I really just want to see if I feel like it lives up to the hype or not, because it's been so long since I read it, and there's so many books now that are like compared to it and trying to do similar things and as this book. So yes, I will definitely be rereading this one in the future. And we have A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I have read this book multiple times. This is I think a children's is the genre or category you put in, classic. I've watched the movie adaptation, I forget what even year that came out, like multiple times. I have this, like, I'm gonna sound like such a broken record, but this is a book I wanted to reread for so many years now. I still have not gotten around to doing it, but definitely a nostalgic book from my childhood, and this is the edition that I've had for forever. Next we have Just Mercy, A True Story of the Fight for Justice by Bryan Stevenson. This is actually the version that's adapted for young adult. I really wanted to read the book before I watched the movie, and because it was so popular at the time the movie was coming out, this was the only version that I could find in person in time for me to read it before I watched the movie. Maybe eventually I will get the not as abridged version, because I know, like, because marketed for young adults they kind of have abridged some parts, but I remember really enjoying this book and I like the movie too. Then we have a science fiction book that I have read, and that is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. This is a modern classic, I think. It's of the science fiction genre, published in 1968. I believe I read this because this book is the inspiration for the Blade Runner films, and at the time I was reading this maybe like a year or two ago, I was like wanting to watch those movies, so I wanted to read the like source material first. I can't even honestly remember if I ended up watching the Blade Runner movies or not, but I did read the book. And we have a nonfiction book I have not read yet, and that is The Time Traveler's Guide to Regency Britain by Ian Mortimer. I purchased this one not too long ago at the last Barnes & Noble half price sale. I have been meaning to get to this. It's a newer release. Ian Mortimer makes a few of these different Time Traveler's Guide books. Like I know there's one for like medieval England, I believe, and there's one for Elizabeth in England and Restoration Britain. I just bought this one, and I'm not buying any of the others until I read this one and see if I enjoy it or not. I'll just go ahead and continue along the theme of unread nonfiction books, and this one has been on my shelf so long, and it's because it's such a chunky book and it's so intimidating, and that is A People's History of the United States from 1492 to 2001 by Howard Zinn. And the book even has a bookmark in it from the last time I attempted to pick it up and read it. It looks like I made it to page 65, and the writing itself isn't even very dense or hard to get into. It's just like when you're like consuming so much history in a writing, it's kind of hard to just like do that for pages and pages and pages. So yes, this is another book I've been putting off for a long time that I want to eventually get to, but yeah, I don't know if that's going to really happen anytime soon. And we have The Pleasure of Reading, 43 Writers on the Discovery of Reading and the Books that Inspired Them. This one is edited by Antonia Fraser, but there's a lot of different writers mentioned in here. The only one I was really familiar with was Margaret Atwood. This is a book I kind of go back and forth on if I'm still interested in reading or not. I know I've attempted to pick it up at least once before, and for one reason or another, never continued on with it. So we'll see. I will definitely give this one another chance before I think about unhauling it. And continuing on with nonfiction books that I have tried to pick up multiple times and never make it very far. This one is Versailles by Tony Spofforth, a biography of a palace. This book has a bookmark in it as well. Looks like this one I made it to page 50 before I put it down, and this book I have attempted a couple different times. But I am determined that I will read this book in its entirety before I do my Europe trip this year, which only gives me a deadline until about September, so this needs to be prioritized soon. Next, we have a short story collection that I have read, and that is If You See Me, Don't Say Hi by Neil Patel. This short story collection came out, I want to guess, in like 2018. Oh, I was actually right, I think. Yeah, this is copyright 2018. And this short story collection I did enjoy. I really want to do a project of rereading all the short story collections I have on my shelves so that I can do more of a specific recommendations video, and even for myself to be able to pinpoint exactly which stories in each collection were my favorites so that I can go back and reread those whenever I feel like it. And we have Diary of a Murderer by Young-Ha Kim. This is a book in translation by Chris Lee. This is actually another short story collection as well. There is like a novella in here, which I believe goes by the name of Diary of a Murderer, but then there's 3 other stories in here as well. I remember the first one, I think, like the Diary of a Murderer, I really liked. It's pretty much like half of this book itself is that novella. It's been a little while since I read this one. I read this one, I think, when it came out back in 2019, but I remember really enjoying it. I think I might have even given it 5 stars at the time, but right now my memory is not working. Continue with the short story collections. The next one we have is Sabrina and Karina by Kali Fajardo Onstein. The cover on this is just super gorgeous, and same thing, I just need to reread this short story collection so I can remember which ones were my favorites. This one has to do with I think mother and daughter relationships, and all the characters in this book are of Latina background, and they take place in Denver, Colorado. We have a book I have not read, that is Eventide by Therese Bowman. Another one's been sitting on my shelves way too long. This is definitely a book I purchased because of a cover by, but it's following the story of Carolina, who's in her 40s, childless and living alone, and is feeling adrift after a long relationship breakup. And we have a Rainbow Rowell book. This one is one of her adult books. I don't know if this is her only adult book she's published. This book, I think, is told through a series of emails. Yeah, it looks like it's told through the story. Yes, the story is told through a series of emails back and forth between two co-workers, I believe. I do sometimes like books with like a mixed media type of format, so that's why I'm still interested in picking this one up and seeing if I enjoy it or not. Then we have a book I have read, and that is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. I remember really enjoying this book back when I read it. I don't even know, it was quite some years ago, and ever since then I have been looking forward to rereading it again. I really enjoyed Betty Smith's writing. This is a modern classic, and I actually haven't even read any other books by Betty Smith surprisingly since then, even though I really did enjoy her writing. That's something I definitely need to fix soon. This book takes place following a young girl in she's growing up in Brooklyn, and we're following her childhood. It takes place in like the early 1900s. I really want to refresh my memory on this by rereading it whenever I can make that happen. And we have another Donna Tartt book, and Donna Tartt is an author who needs to release a new book soon because it has been way too long. I believe The Goldfinch was the last book that she released. I've read all of Donna Tartt's books, and of them, I believe The Goldfinch was the one that I enjoyed the least. I really I remember loving The Secret History and Little Friend, who I think Little Friend actually I will be showing you guys shortly. The Goldfinch was adapted into a movie. This was such a long book. I don't know if necessarily I have plans to reread it anytime soon. If I were to reread a Donna Tartt book, I would prioritize her other stuff first, but maybe give it a few more years and I will feel like picking this one back up again. Then we have Girls Burn Brighter by Shaba Rowe. It's been a while since I read this book, so I don't really remember a lot of the details, but it was a debut novel. I remember I enjoyed it, and it's set in India and America, and it's about the bond between two girls who are driven apart by circumstances but relentless in their search for each other. Then we have a book, very short, but I loved this book. I remember giving it 5 stars at the time, and that is Human Acts by Han Kang, who I can't remember if I read this book first or The Vegetarian, but The Vegetarian I didn't really care for too much. This one I really enjoyed, highly recommend, will eventually reread. I actually have Han Kang's latest book on my TBR right now, Greek Lessons, that just got released I think like a week or 2 ago. So I'm hoping I enjoy it as much as I did enjoy this one. This one takes place in Korea, and we're following a violent student uprising in South Korea as a young boy is shockingly killed. I remember it was a very moving, very touching book, and I cannot wait to eventually reread it. And we have a book I haven't read. This is The Sellout by Paul Beatty. I think I picked this up on my last trip to Powell's Books in Oregon, and this book kind of just stood out to me. It wasn't really on my radar. I just picked it up while I was there. It takes place in the outskirts of LA, and it's kind of described as an agrarian ghetto of Dickens. The narrator believes that his father's racially charged psychological studies will lead to a memoir that will solve their financial woes, but his father ends up being killed in a police shootout, and all that's left is the bill for the funeral. So this is also one I'm thinking I'm going to prioritize soon. Next, we have a short story, and that is Recitative by Toni Morrison. A very tiny book, but a very interesting study on following the story of these two girls, and one's black and one's white, but we don't know who's who, and the whole time we never find that out, but your mind kind of will try to sort it out, and you just never really know either way. And we have a George R.R. Martin book, and that is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms with illustrations by Gary Gianni. This book made it to my top favorite books of 2022. I really enjoyed it, and it really solidified that I do love George R.R. Martin's writing even outside of the main Game of Thrones books canon. And this book is actually being adapted, I think they announced within like the last week or 2 ago, into another series by HBO. I think it also goes by the Tales of Dunk and Egg, but I forget what they said they're going to name the show, but it's going to be something different. I really enjoyed the illustrations that are all throughout to the book. There are a lot of them. I really enjoyed following this adventure between Dunk and Egg, and I really am hoping and looking forward to a follow-up with more stories following their adventures, eventually if George can get around to writing it anytime soon. And then we have another book that I read. This book came out in September 2019. It's called Slay by Brittany Morris. I remember this book very fondly because it was the first time I'd ever received an ARC for a book before, so that was very exciting, and for an ARC for a book that I was super excited for that was coming out. This is a young adult contemporary book, and we're following this young girl who is interested in video games and creating her own games. She's responsible for creating this huge online game called Slay, and as that spirals into something a little bit more out of her control, I remember I really did enjoy this book, and I should see if Brittany Morris has actually written any other books since then. I think she might have. I don't remember if I picked it up or not though. Then we have another ARC that I received. This one came out last year, September of last year, and that is Black Skinhead by Brandy Collins Dexter, Reflections on Blackness and Our Political Future. I love the cover on this one. I think I actually ended up mostly just like listening to this one on audiobook, and I remember really enjoying it. It had a good mix of like modern culture, you could say, and also mixed in with like some of her more like family history and background. I will say like those parts were the more interesting parts personally to me. And another book that I have read is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. It was really nice of one of my coworkers to actually buy this book for me at the Waterstones in London when he went to visit, so I was glad to have this like UK edition. Back then, like I never really had a book with an edition outside of like books that were published in the United States, so that was cool. I remember enjoying this book, but it has been a while since I've read it. And we're following Eleanor, who is this kind of like quirky character. This was Gail Honeyman's debut, so also I need to see if since then they have like released anything else or not. Next we have a book I have not read, and that is Lady Anne by Donald Henderson Clark. This is a very old edition of a book. For a minute there I was kind of like obsessed with buying or like researching and trying to find online really cool editions of older books that I hadn't, probably most of them hadn't heard of. So this one I found off of like Mercari or one of those like book resale websites, and for a reasonable price. It may have even been what's that other one called? I can't remember now which one it was I bought this on, but I know I didn't really pay too much for it, and I really enjoy it. Eventually I'll get to it, but it's not really like high priority on my shelves right now. And then back to Donna Tartt. This is the edition I read of The Little Friend. This book I bought for $3. I bought it at a used bookstore in Sacramento. I can't even tell you the name of it because it's been closed down for so long. And I got to there randomly, just was a book I just randomly picked up off the shelves. Didn't know anything about Donna Tartt, and at the time I didn't know anything about booktube or anything about anything really. I just thought this book sounded interesting and I picked it up and I really enjoyed it. I don't think I'd even really read at the time a lot of like books that would fall into the like mystery genre, and this book was actually her debut, I think. And yeah, we're following like the murder of a child, I believe it was. I don't really want to read too much into the plot and like be spoiled and for things as they come back to my memory of it, about this book, but definitely in this grand scheme of like books I would like to reread eventually, this would be high priority. Next we have one I haven't read, and that's a nonfiction book called Arnig, or Sketches from the Life of a Free Black by Harriet E. Wilson. This is a slave narrative following a young girl named Fredo, a mulatto girl abandoned by her white mother after the death of the child's black father, who grows up as an indentured servant to a white family in 19th century Massachusetts. There was some sort of book recommendation list that I came across online that had mentioned this, which sparked me to want to pick this up because it sounded very interesting. Another one I haven't read is Confessions of a Sociopath, a life spent hiding in plain sight by M.E. Thomas. I think this one is a nonfiction book too, because it's described as part memoir and part psychological treatise. So I do have a lot of nonfiction books on the shelf that I have not gotten to yet that I need to change. Next we have a Janet Fitch book, and that is The Revolution of Marina M. There is a sequel follow-up to this book that I haven't read yet. Eventually I'll get to, but it's been so long since I read this one, I feel like I would have to reread it before I get to it. And while I enjoyed this book, it's a very dense book, 700 pages, 800 pages actually. So I haven't been in the biggest rush to reread this. If I were to, I'd probably try to get like an audiobook or something. And this book is very different than Janet Fitch's other books in that this one is more historical fiction. It takes place in Russia. You can tell it's very well researched and complex novel, but it's just very different than the other books from Janet Fitch that I have read. So yeah, I didn't really enjoy it as much as say like White Oleander, which I really loved. Another nonfiction book we have, but this one I have read, and that is Worn, A People's History of Clothing by Sophie Thanhauser. I actually read this one last year when it was released, And this was very interesting, just learning about the topic of specifically a lot of different types of fabrics and their history that they come across. Like some of it was a little bit dry reading, to be honest, but I did learn a lot and there were some interesting parts in here as well. Another nonfiction book, this one I did read, and that is A Black Women's History of the United States by Dana Ramey Berry and Kelly Nicole Gross. This one I think came out like a year or two ago. Yeah, this one was published in 2020 and it's looking at history but through the perspectives of stories from different Black women. And we're almost done, down to the last two books, which both of them I have not read. The first book is a very small little book, and that is Dream Sequence by Adam Folds, a book that's been on my shelves for way too long and I don't even remember what this one's about. We're following Henry, who stars in this show as a television drama beloved by mothers and wives, and whose fans speak about the characters as though they're living people. He dreams of escaping the small screen for better things. So yes, this I should just really get to because it's not even that long of a book. It's like 200 pages. The other one is the complete opposite. It's a chunky book, and that is the complete works of Oscar Wilde. So this is all of his stories, plays, poems, and essays. I want to have a project of eventually making my way through this, but it's not really like a high priority project right now, but it is something I would like to do. I have read some of Oscar Wilde's works before. I know I've read like The Picture of Dorian Gray. I think I've read some of his poems as well. This collection of his works is about 1,200 pages, so this isn't something I would just sit down and read cover to cover in a month or even 2 months. So I'd probably like break this up into chunks and, you know, maybe spend even up to a whole year just reading like a little bit of this every month, like I don't know, maybe like 100 pages a month or something like that. Maybe I'll do that next year, but for right now it's not a high priority. So those are the last of the books that are living on this bookshelf right here. I'm going to go ahead and count up how many books that I have read and haven't read. Altogether there were 35 books that are currently living on the shelf, so let me get those numbers. So all in all, I have not read 14 of the 35 books on this shelf. So I have read 21 books that are currently sitting on that shelf, so I read more than half, which is I feel like a pretty good percentage. I think for most of my books, like all my book collection in total, I've read about half of the books that I own, so this shelf is really following along with the rest of the numbers. I'm going to prioritize or pick out 3 books that I would like to attempt to read during the month of May. Half of the ones I haven't read are nonfiction and the other half are regular fiction. So I decided to pick 2 nonfiction books that I wanted to prioritize, both of them more recent purchases, and that was The Time Traveler's Guide to Regency Britain. I thought would be interesting since I am going to be in Britain later on in this year, so maybe I'll learn something. And then I also chose All That She Carried, The Journey of Ashley Sack, A Black Family Keepsake by Taya Miles. I've really been wanting to read this book because I know it's won a lot of awards and had a lot of like recognition. And then lastly, we have The Sellout by Paul Beatty, and I just felt like picking this one up, and we'll just see how that one goes. If I do end up reading these 3 books, then that will mean that by the end of May, I'll have read like about 2/3 of the books on that shelf, which I think is pretty good. So that's it for this bookshelf spotlight. We just have one more shelf to go, which is going to be my series bookshelf, so stay tuned. That will be coming out in the next month or so, and then we'll get to go through the fun and slightly intimidating project of moving my books, rearranging them, refreshing how I organize my book collection. So I hope you guys enjoyed this deep dive into one of the shelves on my bookcase, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!